So you think that if we would have given this much attention and this much funding and news coverage and stuff,
we wouldn't have the heroin problem?
You don't think so?
No. You know, a lot of times when things are in the inner city core, people don't pay attention to it.
It's an issue that we continue to struggle with in this country, you know, where the majority seems to have more compassion to address those issues that particularly impact them, and sort of look at the black community and the problems that they have as though somehow it's their own fault and they need to fix it themselves.
People that more or less used the crack was like down, and they didn't have nobody fighting for them or family pulling for them. They didn't have a big job they lost, or you know, their face wasn't in the limelight.
The heroin epidemic is largely affecting white folks, and that has galvanized support for more treatment and treating addiction as a public health issue. I absolutely think that we ought to be treating addiction as a public health issue, but it makes one think, why didn't we have that approach 30 years ago?
I think it's right, the approach we're taking for heroin. I think it's 30 years late for the communities that have been suffering.
Since white people are dying, that, you know, that it's like this big, huge epidemic thing, and it's like, okay, when we were dying, what happened then?
Where was the majority population addressing this issue when crack cocaine and all the other drugs were just overwhelming the black community, which really caused a lot of destruction to the black family?
The individuals were demonized. They were the problem. And it wasn't the drug that was the problem. They weren't the victims, they were the issue. And let's get them in jail, let's get them locked up and get them out of society.
I was a public defender in the early 90s, and yes, there was some treatment, but not enough, and the first response was, let's lock folks up. I never would have imagined in the 90s that we'd be at this point where public health is the primary lens now by which we're looking at addiction. That's due to the prescription pill epidemic.
Some of this is the fault of physicians. The doctors write too much pain medication to start with. There was a time period in which doctors were under a lot of scrutiny, a lot of criticism that we were not providing adequate pain medication to patients.
It takes you out of your current state of being and push you into another state, but when you come off of that high, the problem still exists. So we're not dealing with the problem, with the root cause of the problem.
What we're looking at, though, are the symptoms of greater problems, and I think until we address those greater problems, all we're going to do is address symptoms, which means that the causes will continue to be there, will continue to fuel the problems that we're facing in this nation.
I've been in the atmosphere of drugs pretty much all my life.
I personally have lived with, have been around, still, and I go back to these communities. It's still there.
On my lifetime, I've seen a lot of druggies. I've seen a lot of people who have overcome drugs, and I've known a lot of people that have died from drug overdose. This epidemic that we're going through now is a huge, they used to say it was a monkey on the back, but I see it as a gorilla.
We have to do something different.
We got to learn to pay more attention to what happens to our neighbors. And I don't mean your neighbor next door. I mean your neighbor is 30 miles from you or 50 miles from you, but within your confine of where you're living.
Imagine a community where we don't write people off because they may have been addicted to drugs, but tell them that when they conquer that addiction, that they've done something heroic, and embrace them when they have their weak moments and not lock them up, but treat them. This approach where we label someone a criminal and lock them up is defining them by the worst thing that they've done, rather than looking at them in terms of the best they have to offer.